I knew the young consultant had lost the room the moment he told a 70-year-old bus driver that her decades of experience were an unreliable metric. Unfortunately, that bus driver was my mother. My name is Dana. I work in logistics for a transportation company outside St. Louis. And a few months ago, our corporate office rolled out a massive modernization initiative. I had convinced my mother, Margaret, to attend the kickoff meeting, thinking it would make her proud to see the company evolving. Instead, I spent the first hour melting into my chair, wishing I could disappear. The conference room sat on the second floor, its large windows overlooking a depot where rows of yellow buses rested in neat, symmetrical lines beneath a heavy gray winter sky. Inside, the air smelled aggressively of burnt coffee and fresh carpet. The table was surrounded by managers, in matching quarter-zip pullovers with our company logo stitched over the chest. In stark contrast, my mother wore the same navy cardigan she saved for funerals, church services, and important occasions. She had driven school buses for 43 years. That is long enough to drive a generation of children, and eventually, their children. Her hands rested quietly on the table, knuckles swollen from arthritis, a faded silver wristwatch hanging loosely around her wrist. It was a watch I remembered from my entire childhood, one that had survived snowstorms, engine breakdowns, and a highly memorable incident involving a second grader and an exploding carton of chocolate milk. The algorithm versus the human. The consultant, Tyler, couldn't have been older than 26. He clicked enthusiastically through his slides, presenting colorful maps and impressive-looking charts. Our predictive routing model removes human-biased transportation decisions, Tyler explained, his laser pointer dancing across the screen. Historically, route adjustments have relied too heavily on instinct and anecdotal observations. Our data identifies inefficiencies that drivers often miss. Human judgment creates unnecessary variability. I glanced at my mother. She sat perfectly still as the presentation continued, bombarding us with the corporate buzzwords of the future: algorithmic optimization, predictive routing, machine learning, behavioral correction. Every sentence he spoke seemed to politely suggest that decades of human experience were little more than outdated habits waiting to be cleanly replaced by code. When the floor opened for questions, a heavy silence settled over the room. Then, my mother raised her hand. I nearly stopped breathing. Tyler pointed toward her with a polite, practiced smile. "Yes, ma'am?" She stood slowly, smoothing her cardigan. "My question," she said, "is whether your system notices scared children. Does it track them?" A ripple of confusion went through the executives. Tyler blinked, his smile faltering. "I'm sorry? Our software focuses on transportation efficiency." "Okay," my mother nodded, looking down briefly before meeting his eyes again. "Last winter, I had a little girl on my route. 3rd grade, maybe. Every morning, she'd sit 3 rows behind me and stare out the window. One day, she got on the bus without her coat. It was freezing out, maybe 10 degrees. 3 days later, she forgot her lunch. A week after that, she started falling asleep on the ride." Tyler folded his arms, shifting awkwardly from one foot to the other. "What does that have to do with routing?" "Nothing yet," she replied, her voice perfectly calm. Then one morning, she climbed aboard wearing the exact same clothes she'd worn all week. I noticed because I'd seen that child every weekday for 7 months. I reported it. She paused, letting the silence hang. It turned out her mother was in the hospital, and her father had lost his job. They were sleeping in a motel. Your software might know the absolute fastest route from point A to point B, but it wouldn't know that little girl needed help. Tyler cleared his throat, clearly eager to regain control. "Well, those are certainly valuable observations, but our system is designed to scale." The word landed with a hollow thud. My mother simply nodded and sat back down. The weight of wisdom. The discussion tried to awkwardly move on until a voice spoke up from the back of the room. Can I add something? Everyone turned to see Harold Benson, to most. He was just an 81-year-old board member who rarely attended meetings. To me, he was the founder of the company. He stood up carefully, leaning on the table, and the room instantly snapped to attention. He looked directly at my mother. Margaret. Hello, Harold, she smiled warmly. Harold turned to the rest of the table. 5 years ago, during that ice storm that shut down half the county, who remembers it? Several heads nodded. I remembered it well. Closed roads, downed power lines, and scrambling schools. Our dispatch center was using the most advanced weather forecasting available at the time. Good technology, Harold noted, gesturing toward Tyler's blank screen. Then he pointed at my mother. But Margaret called dispatch at 4:30 in the morning and told us not to send any buses down the Western Ridge routes. Tyler looked puzzled. But the forecast said conditions were safe. It did, Harold agreed, his expression softening. But Margaret had walked outside. She told dispatch the air. Asterisk felt asterisk wrong. A few people chuckled nervously. I know how that sounds, Harold laughed. But she noticed the power lines humming. She noticed a thin layer of freezing mist that wasn't showing up on the radar. She noticed the birds sheltering unusually low in the trees. She had seen those signs before. We delayed those routes. 40 minutes later, black ice completely covered the Western Ridge. The room fell dead silent. Harold folded his hands and looked at Tyler. Technology is wonderful. It helps us see patterns. But wisdom sees meaning. Something shifted in the room. Nobody applauded or stood up like they do in the movies. But people looked at my mother differently. They were finally seeing her. I looked at her too. I saw the faded watch, the worn cardigan, and the tired hands. I saw a woman who had woken up before dawn for 4 decades. Who knew exactly which kids needed extra encouragement on a Monday. Who carried spare gloves because someone always forgot theirs. Growing up, I thought she was just a bus driver. Sitting there, I realized she was a witness. A guardian. A keeper of small things. What cannot be measured. When the meeting ended, several executives bypassed Tyler to shake my mother's hand. They asked her real questions, not polite ones. When the room finally emptied, she picked up her purse. That was nice, she said casually, as if nothing unusual had just occurred. We walked to the parking lot together as snow. Flurries drifted through the afternoon air. She checked her old silver watch. Still ticking. Still reliable. Just like her. You know, I said, leaning against her. Truck, they should probably figure out a way to put some of what you know into the software. She laughed, a warm, rich sound. Honey, nobody wants that much information. I laughed with her, and we stood quietly for a moment. Beyond the chain link tints, the buses were lined up against the fading winter sky. Thousands of routes. Millions of miles. Countless children. All that knowledge was stored nowhere except inside one ordinary woman. We are living in an age obsessed with collecting data, every click, every signal, every measurable metric. Perhaps that is necessary. But some of the most profound knowledge in the world still lives exclusively within people. The nurse who notices a subtle shift in a patient's breathing. The mechanic who hears trouble before a machine breaks. The teacher who spots loneliness hiding behind a loud joke. The bus driver who recognizes when a child is carrying far more than just a backpack. Not everything valuable can be uploaded to a cloud. Not everything important can be optimized. Some wisdom is earned one day at a time over decades of simply paying attention. If we are truly smart, we will listen to it before it disappears.